All right. Hey everyone. So I wanted to come on, it's 1st of July, and I want to talk a little bit about current wildfire hazard conditions, kind of specifically for the Northern Sierra Nevada mountains. We've got red flag warnings this week for hot weather and winds in the valley and foothills. And so it's fire season for sure in the valley and in the lower foothills. But once you get up into the higher elevations, it's still a little more nuanced. I was in Tahoe this weekend, and I noticed that there's a campfire ban and that there's signs up saying that it's high fire hazard. And this was at 6,000 feet. This was like Rainbow Road off of I-80. And it is dry for sure on the northern, or on the eastern side of the mountains. But on the western slope, around 4,000, 5,000 feet, things are still kind of, they're not quite there as far as I can tell. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about ways that we look at fire hazard, ways we understand wildfire hazard season. And I think it's really important for us to learn the nuances, because I think, psychologically we can't survive living in places with a high fire hazard if we think that every single day, between May and December is fire season. So I think getting to know when you're in critical fire hazard and when you're not is important, and that we can't necessarily rely on the agencies to give us the most nuanced information, and we can't rely on the media because we'll have red flag warnings in the valley and they'll be telling you, if you live in Quincy, that it's extreme fire hazard. So we're going to talk a little bit about what drives fires. I guess I'll use my backyard as an example, and then we're going to do a little science, real hillbilly science. So there's kind of two things that define the fire hazard. Really, there's the fuel moisture, and there's three. There's the availability of fuel, and there's availability of kind of oxygen and wind, and then there's the topography and where you are in the landscape. But we're going to talk about fuel moisture, right? You've got live fuel moisture, which is moisture that's in vegetation that's growing, and then you've got dead fuel moisture, which is how dry the dead sticks are. So just kind of looking around my backyard here, I've got some prunings that I took off of apricot tree a couple days ago, and they're kind of papery, And up here I've got my apricot tree that I didn't whack, right? And definitely, it's just 3 days of drying here, and the live fuel moisture has started to depart from my prunings. And then over here I've got some mugwort, and I've got kind of a mix of dead sticks down in here, and then I've got the green foliage. So I've got both kinds of fuel moisture here to worry about. I've got this grass, which is dead, and so it dries out really quickly. And then I've got the dead sticks of this bush, and then I've got the green foliage. So when you start a campfire, you don't use wet sticks, right? So I've got some grass here that's this stuff's been sitting in the sun in my backyard for a couple weeks now. Right now, it's first thing in the morning. It's kind of humid, like all in all. Like, look at the stuff. Like, in the afternoon, this would consume all the way down by itself, right? But right now, like, it's taking some time to dry itself out, right? And look, it's kind of even like it may even go out rather than carry through. Because there's, right now, the dead fuel moisture, first thing in the morning here, is it's got all the moisture from overnight, where the humidities came up overnight. So that's one of the concerns going into this week is it's going to be hot, it's going to be dry, and it's going to stay really warm at night, and the humidity is not going to recover. So when we talk about humidity recovery, it's like how moist did it get, you know, at the peak of the night? Like usually, you know, 4 or 5 in the morning, that's kind of your maximum humidity. And so right now, because it's early and we're in the shade, like this dead grass over here underneath my mugwort, it's not incredibly flammable. It'll burn, but it might even go out. So if we light that same bundle after it's been in the sun for an hour, or, you know, at the end of the day today, it's going to burn. It'll carry it all the way across. So I want to talk a bit about the flammability of live fuel moisture. And so I've got, even within this this apricot that I cut, I've got some pretty dry stuff that was kind of sitting more in the sun. I've got some stuff here that is less dry, still a little moist, and then we'll pull a little pure green, right? So here we are, we're playing with fire for science, and I recommend doing this. You know, if you got a fire pit, a good safe place, you know, here I'm at a fire pit that's surrounded with pavers, and I'm in my backyard, which is mowed, got a hose nearby. This is how you can understand the flammability of the landscape around you, and, you know, in some ways then your risk, right? So here we go, we're gonna look at the stuff that has been drying in the sun for a couple days. So it's burning, but it's it might not really, it's gonna probably go out. Right, that's the driest stuff. That's been a couple days. This stuff, another part of the same fire that, or same, it's cut at the same time, but it's been in the shade a little more. So it's spreading, but you know, it's also going to go out here. One of the reasons it's going out is because with live fuel moisture, the fire has to kind of boil the moisture out of the vegetation before it can burn. And here's the stuff that's just on a tree right now. Like, it won't burn at all, right? It's because it's full of moisture. If I cook back here, like, you'll see the moisture on the metal there. Like, we're boiling the moisture out. So a really important thing about live fuel moisture this time of year for fire season is that live fuel moisture retards the fire behavior, right? I like to say, like, the live fuel moisture kind of robs the fire of its mojo. And that's because the fire actually has to take heat that it could put into lighting other things on fire and put that heat into boiling water out of the vegetation. So, like, if we look right now, if I take my grass that wouldn't burn very well, make it a little more flammable, and then I put my my green twig on top of it here. You can hear the kind of crackling, and it's actually sucking moisture out of that fire. I mean, it's sucking energy out of the fire to have to boil off this green vegetation. Fire's still burning, but it's not burning like it would if it wasn't having to do any work here. And you see lots of white smoke, right? So this time of year when you see a fire and it's got a lot of white smoke, oftentimes that's because it's boiling off the moisture in the green vegetation. So what's that mean for you if you live right now in Nevada City? You know, what's that mean if you live in Truckee? Well, one of the biggest things about live fuel moisture is that it doesn't mean as much if you've got a huge amount of dead vegetation to carry the fire. So the way I look at it, the way this is important is we've got all these burn scars on the landscape from recent fires, like the Car Fire and the Tubbs Fire, Camp Fire, Bear Fire. And a lot of those burns, they burned really hot and they consumed a lot of the dead brush that was there. And a lot of those places, and I'm sorry about this squealy noise, it's my neighbor's pool pump. A lot of those places, they had, there wasn't much after the fire was gone. You know, there's a lot of just black ground, hardly anything growing there. Hardly, all the fuel was gone, right? Just black sticks. So those areas don't have a lot of dead fuel right now. They're mainly covered with young, vigorously sprouting like bay or tan oak or even manzanita, live oak. So in places, recent burn scars where you don't have a lot of fine dead fuels, this live fuel moisture part of the puzzle is a lot more important. If you're talking about somewhere that hasn't burned for 60, 70, 100 years, and you've got tall dead brush, and tall green brush with half of it's dead, then the dead fuel moisture is going to carry the fires right now. And often if there's like wind and slope, there's plenty of fuel to kind of overcome this limiting effect of live fuel moisture. So like the Apache fire we had last week in Orville, it's an area that hasn't burned for a long time. It's got a really healthy kind of thatch of grass from a couple big wet winters that hasn't really been necessarily grazed or burned away. And it's got just a lot of dead brush and dead kind of material in the brush. So the wind blew on that fire. Fire ran hard for like 3 hours when it had the wind and it had the fuel available. But we're not going to see the same kind of fire behavior as that in an area like the Bear Fire that is all green brush. So we're going to do a little longer video coming up, but what we did yesterday was we drove from Lake Tahoe to down through Nevada City, and I've got kind of samples we took here. So we collected samples at 6,000 feet up by Rainbow Road, 5,000 feet between Nevada City and Highway 80, which was Manzanita, 4,000 feet. Couldn't find any manzanita, but it was black oak. 3,000 feet red, Nevada City. Down to about 1,000 feet. Down by Peoria Road. And down there it was like, 105 yesterday. Up at 6,000 feet yesterday, it only got up to, like 75 degrees. So I'm just gonna burn a little bit of each of those just to look at like, hey, how flammable is green vegetation at 6,000 feet. And then we're going to take the rest of the stuff and we're going to weigh it. And we're going to dry it for a week and then we're going to weigh it again. And so that's the sciencey part. And this is actually something that the Forest Service does on a regular basis. They have people that cut brush and they cut the leaves and then they weigh them and then they put them in a little oven and then they dry them out for a couple days and they weigh them again. And that's a scientific way of determining percent moisture or live fuel moisture. So all that stuff goes into kind of a database. And so when you see like the fire hazard rating on the side of the road, fire danger high today, fire danger moderate, that's based on science. That's based on measurements of live and dead fuel moisture. So here's our 6,000 foot manzanita. I mean, it's been in a Tupperware in my cooler and it's wet in there, right? Like, so here, 6,000 feet. That's wet, man. Like, look at that. I've got a full-on blowtorch on it. It's not even, you can see the moisture boiling out of it, but. So, after 10 seconds with a full-on flamethrower, it went out. 6,000 feet. Okay, so what's that tell you? That tells you, we already talked about it. Not quite crazy fire season yet in the high Sierra. Let's go down to 5,000 feet. This is some nice manzanita. I'm expecting kind of the same thing. So this isn't to say at all that you should just let your campfire burn and not worry about it. Like we said, you know, fire hazard is determined by live and dead fuel moisture. So here's your 5,000 foot manzanita. Not very flammable. I don't know why they have a campfire ban in effect up in the Tahoe Basin right now, or on the Tahoe National Forest. I feel like when we deprive people of a chance to have fires, we kind of increase the disconnection between people's perception of fire and the reality of fire. Obviously, they're managing a lot of people, 4th of July weekend, firecrackers, everything. And in Truckee right now, there's a ton of pine needles, and if there's wind, you could definitely have a fast-moving fire. Also, though, Truckee's the east side. It's a desert. And so you come over on the west side of the Tahoe National Forest, and I'm not sure that that high fire hazard sign I saw was really the science. You know, I want to look into that. We're going to do a follow-up video. Okay, 4,000 feet. 4,000 feet was green black oak. There's a lot to say about black oak. Sorry for the whack camera action here. One of the things you can say about black oak is that it's a good thing to have around. Because it stays so moist, you don't really tend to have like a lot of running crown fires in black oak. And black oak, people have been eating black oak acorns since the beginning of time. It's where you find black oak, you find those are places that people have always lived. So let's see how the 4,000 foot black oak's burning. Seems pretty green. It's green foliage. Okay, not burning much. I mean, this is kind of, you kind of know this, right? Like green foliage doesn't burn very well. Okay, let's go down to Nevada City, 3,000 feet. Now, the longer video we're gonna do, like this bush that I cut this manzanita off of, it was pretty gnarly. It had a lot of dead material in it. Like if there was a fire at the base of this bush today, it would rip because there's so much dead in there. But also these manzanita right now, they got big old berries on them. It's kind of, the manzanita is kind of in its peak growing season right now. And so manzanita is kind of surprising in that it's hard to get it to burn. Like, the big problem with all this stuff that's kind of dominated by live fuel moisture is that live fuel moisture doesn't really do you any good when you have that big kind of east wind driven fire in September, October. Because the thing with live fuel moisture in all these kind of California Mediterranean shrubbery, kind of with the exception of the black oak, is that this stuff all goes dormant kind of in July and end of July, beginning of August. And so by September, the dormant, you don't have any more live fuel moisture. It drops to what we call kind of a critical level. And that depends on the plant, but and we'll talk about that more in our detailed video. But here's Nevada City. Nevada City. you can see the moisture that's condensed on there. This stuff is green as can be. So what I'm seeing here, just kind of anecdotally or just very hillbilly science, is the vegetation at 3,000 feet almost looks like it's got more moisture in it than the vegetation at 6,000 feet. So can you have fires today in Nevada City? Yes. Can they be bad? Yes. Are you going to have a Dixie fire in Nevada City today? A Tubbs fire? You know, campfire? No, you're not. I mean, look at this. It's still... All right, so that was like 20 or 30 seconds with direct contact with a flamethrower. And the leaf that I was heating burns and then it goes out. So that's gonna suck a lot of mojo out of a forest fire. So what we see this time of the year with fires in places like Nevada City is we have the concept of alignment, where fires like to run uphill and with the wind. And so if you've got kind of aligned fuels, you know, if we have a fire that starts tomorrow in the bottom of the South Fork Yuba with an up canyon wind, it's gonna blow up to the top of the ridge. But with all that, and that's because you got kind of all the preheating of the fire's intensity burning in the dead sticks and everything and the grass. Man, my neighbor's pool pump is driving me crazy. So fires burn with alignment this time of year. Once the wind stops or once they run out of slope, the fire doesn't have the energy to burn vigorously back downhill. Doesn't really have the energy to burn vigorously across the slope. So we saw that a couple weeks ago with the Sites fire. It had strong north winds. It ripped off, 10 or 15,000 acres in the first day. And then once the wind stopped blowing, the firefighters easily contained the edges of it. It burned in this long, skinny shape. Last year, the year before, we saw the same thing happen with a fire that was kind of burning northwest of Nevada City. So yeah, you can have fires this time of year that run with wind, they run with slope, and then once they run out of that alignment, it's really hard for them to sustain. Okay, so we did 3,000 feet. I'm just gonna do 1,000 feet. We're gonna weigh this stuff and dry it in the sun for a week and then weigh it again in a longer video, but I don't have time for that right now. So I'm just gonna do this 1,000 feet. So we got down to 1,000 feet last night. Down around Peoria Road on Highway 20, and I cut some live oak because there was no manzanita around, and that stuff felt crispy. I mean, it had been sitting there all day, probably 105 degrees. So I wouldn't be surprised if this stuff burned pretty well, but it might surprise me. There's a lot of moisture in there. Sorry, ant. Okay. So even down there in the lower foothills, still a lot of moisture in the green shrubbery. So red flag warnings, what's that mean? You should be careful with fire this weekend because in the dry grass, in the dry brush, in the valley, in the foothills, fires in areas with lots of dead fuels are going to burn vigorously and dangerously. And one of the reasons we lose control of fires under these conditions that make it so dangerous is because firefighters are standing next to a forest fire, especially in the valley and places with lots of dead fuels. But if you're at 6,000 feet, just know that the landscape around you has a lot of moisture in it. And it's all, this time of year, we always want to be careful with fire. It doesn't take much for a small campfire to burn someone's house down. It might not become the next Dixie fire, but it also makes work for firefighters who have better things to do than put out nuisance fires. So, what else to say about any of that? Let's see if there's any comments here. Someone says, by this reasoning, why are we told to keep live vegetation away from our homes versus irrigating as a fire break? Well, live vegetation later in the season becomes dead vegetation, or becomes, the live fuel moisture goes away. And you could irrigate it, and it's delicate, I think, but we don't do nuance very well, right? There's things you can do. It depends on where you live. It depends on what kind of vegetation you're talking about. We really have to boil a lot of this stuff down to simple messaging, and it's hard to cover that. Flammability of snags. William Smith Clark is asking about flammability of snags and dead material in burn scars. That's a good one.